Hello and welcome to Into the Woods with Holly Wharton. This podcast is all about our journey into the woods of ourselves, getting to know who we are, where we are, and where we're going in life so that we can create the life that we want to live. It's about deepening your connection with yourself, taking inspired action, and really trusting yourself and your intuition. It's also about mindset. Our beliefs are such an important part of this journey, and there are so many ways for us to change our mindset so that we can more easily live a life of expansive joy. This podcast is also about going literally into the woods and spending time in nature, and how that can help us on our own personal journey of self-knowledge. Thank you so much for joining us today. Now let's get into this week's episode. Hello, adventurers, and welcome to the Into the Woods podcast, episode 435. This is your host, Holly Wharton, and I'm back with another exciting guest. Today, I'm talking with Chris Bedford, also known as Dumpman. I discovered Chris and his work when I walked the Downs Link back in 2016, I think it was. Chris is the owner of Dumpman Films, and he makes documentaries about disused railways in southern England. Now, back when I was researching my book on the Wey-South Path, I bought one of his films on the Hardham canal tunnel, and I found it really fascinating. You may know that two of my favorite trails are the Wey-South Path, which goes along a mostly disused canal, and the Downs Link, which follows a disused railway. I really love exploring these pieces of history, and I find abandoned transportation routes to be especially interesting for some reason. Now, outdoor adventures don't need to be all about fitness and training and endurance and physical challenges. They can also be about exploration and reconnecting with history. And that's one of the things that I hope we get across with this week's episode, and I really hope that after listening to this, you're inspired to explore your area's history. There are so many fascinating places to go and things to see out in nature, and it's really easy to combine exploring with outdoor adventures. So, without further ado, I hope you enjoy this week's episode. Hello, how are you doing today?
Very well. Nice to meet you, Holly. Online, as it were. Yes, very well. Thank you.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you too. I'm excited to talk about abandoned railways with you. So why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Well, my name is Chris, although lots of people call me Dumpman.
Yes.
Because the name of the film company is Dumpman Films. It's not really a film company. It's more of a hobby that just about pays for itself, to tell you the truth. But I've always been interested in disused railways, right back from when I was a kid. And for about the last 20 years or so, I've been making little documentaries, which I flog to people on DVD through eBay and online and the website and everything else. And it's a lot of fun, really. I mean, it's a great delight going into the great outdoors, retracing the course of an old railway, partly for the Victorian delights that you find, the stations, the tunnels, which is the sheer scale of the constructions, but also just to be out in nature. It's a great mix.
Yes.
Which I enjoy thoroughly.
So how did you first get into exploring abandoned railways?
Well, I mean, I think the interest was seeded when I was a kid, because we used to go on family holidays in the West Country in the late 1970s, without giving away my age too much. And my dad would often take us along disused railway track walks, of which there are some fantastic ones on Dartmoor. And I remember him explaining to me, that all these railways had previously run, and that he remembered travelling on them. It seemed extraordinary to me that there was all this work that had gone into building these incredible routes that had just been taken up. It seemed insane. And as a kid, I didn't realise that there was a huge network of something like 6,000 miles of disused track around the country just waiting to be explored. As I grew a bit older, got my own wheels, a bit of mobility, and it suddenly became, I really got to see as much of this as I can. And slightly after that came the idea of, well, why don't we document it as we go? And then a little bit after that, why don't we document it in such a way that other people might enjoy watching it too?
I think that's such a great idea, because not only does it, as you say, pay for your adventures, but it raises awareness of these places that a lot of people might not know about.
I think that was true some years ago. I think now there's much more awareness. There's a lot you might have seen on the news today or yesterday. They've reopened a line in Oakhampton across the northern stretch of Dartmoor. And people, if you look, I mean, I'm a great Facebooker. I communicate with lots of other like-minded disused railway folk. The general awareness of is greater than it used to be. There's a lot more on the telly. Michael Portillo does his, railway journeys and stuff.
Hmm.
There's the Channel 4 guy, I can't remember his name, that does disused railway walks. And I think as well, is the long answer to your question, I think as well the whole COVID thing has increased it because
Yes.
people have spent more time finding out about their local environment and going for walks that they wouldn't necessarily have done. So it's all contributed, really.
And thankfully, a lot of these disused railway lines have been turned into trails, so it makes it easier for people to access.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's stacks and stacks of them in every county, and they're always working on opening up new ones. There are negotiations going on all around the country now with private landowners as to whether or not certain stretches can be reopened. Yeah, there's miles of it. Plenty in Sussex too, which is based.
So how do you manage access? Do you have to get permission? I know obviously some of these places are accessible, but a lot of them aren't.
Sure. Well, in the old days, I used to just hop over the fence and hope for the best. Nowadays, a lot's changed actually in the last 20 years. There's a lot of places which were private land, but they weren't necessarily hotly defended. Whereas now the private landowner, I'll give you an example, made friends with a lady down in the West Country, a town called Yelverton. She owns a railway tunnel. And in the old days, she didn't really mind the idea of people, kids mostly, scampering in there to check it out. Nowadays, litigious society, she's terrified of being sued for crawling out of her railway tunnel and injuring someone. So I think that culture has made the landowners stricter about their privacy than they used to be. I try very hard now to get in touch with all the landowners I need to before I set off. I'm not really the 20-something-year-old that I used to be sneaking under the barbed wire fence. It's not as easy as it used to be.
No, of course not. It's so appealing, though, because it's like sometimes I'll see things on the other side of the fence and I think, oh, I'd love to kind of go down there and check it out. But I'm never sure if I want to deal with getting caught.
Well, you can quite often look online, look on YouTube or wherever and see if someone else has done it. And then make a fresh assessment as to whether you want to sneak in there yourself. Because you can bet your boots somebody's been there already.
Oh, I'm sure. And at one time, I was reading on your website, you even ran Dumpman's tunnel parties.
Yeah, so that was 89, 90 and 91. There's a little railway tunnel just east of Hayward Heath, a little village called Newick. Actually used to be part of the Bluebell Railway before it was closed in the 60s. And I discovered that tunnel as a teenager. In those days, you could just stroll on in. And I thought it'd be rather fun to have a party and gathered a few like-minded friends. We had a bonfire, stereo down there, that sort of stuff. Slept the night. And it grew, the local pubs, people got to find out about it. We did it a second year. And I think on the last year that we did it, which was 1991, there's about 150, 200 people.
Wow.
And it was dancing all night, and candles down each side of the tunnel to give it a kind of runway effect. It was magic. It's absolute magic. It's all fenced off now, though, so you can't go in there.
That's too bad. It just makes me so sad. I mean, I remember the first time I discovered the Downs Link, which is one of my favorite trails, and I learned about the history of the disused railways and how they were all abandoned with the beaching cuts. And it just made me so angry because, I love trains so much, and I feel like so many of these lines went through really beautiful parts of the country, and of course now we can walk them, some of them, but it just made me so angry that this piece of history was just cut off and abandoned.
That's a good point. I mean, I run a Facebook group called Disused Railways of Sussex, and there's lots of discussion on there from all ages. People are just discovering that disused railways exist at all, coming on in the first place, right the way through to people that remember the trains running in the first place. So you've got this sort of dilemma as an enthusiast. Are you glad that the railways were closed so that you have the opportunities to walk them? Because if none of them had been closed, that Facebook group wouldn't even exist. I wouldn't have made any of my films. You wouldn't have that exploring old industrial heritage thing, which is pretty special. If the lines were all still live, none of this we probably wouldn't be talking, Holly. Do you realise?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So it's a great dilemma. I love the fact that they've been taken up, but they should be put back eventually.
Oh, I would love it. And I love that you said they've just reopened that line In Oakhampton, you said?
That's right. Yeah.
So I guess there is hope.
Yeah, they never really took that one up, to be honest. They just closed it, and it was used for industrial purposes. But from a passenger point of view, I think the official reopening is this coming Saturday.
Oh.
And then passenger services will be reintroduced for the first time since 1966,
Wow.
So that is quite special for those locals, It's a huge difference to their town.
So for people who aren't familiar with these cuts, can you tell us a little bit about the beaching cuts in the 1960s and what that was?
Sure. Well, let's see, without getting too bogged down in the detail. So there's a guy called Beeching who was employed by the government to look at the whole railway network because it was losing vast sums of money. And he basically went in there as a businessman and chopped all sorts of bits. There's a lot of controversy as to how he did that, but I won't bore you with that. And his report was produced in 1963. And from 1963 up to about 1969 was probably the biggest intensity of cuts of railways in this country, where I think they stripped about 6,000 miles off the total, which was about a third of the railway network in this country. Plenty of railways were closed before Beeching, ones that just lost money were regarded as excess anyway. Beeching takes all the rap, every railway was ever closed. It's not true, but it's obviously the first point of reference for these conversations.
So how did you turn your passion for disused railways into a business of selling DVDs? What gave you that idea?
Actually, I've got to give credit to my ex-wife.
Huh?
My dear ex-wife, she's listening. We're still on very good terms. But she was obviously aware of the interest, and I'd made a couple of kind of, not really videos to sell, but for my own records, if you like, And she said, why don't you stick one of them on eBay? Pop it on a DVD. Pop it on eBay. I thought, well, yeah, why not? And there was a really great response. And so from that moment on, which was sometime in, I don't know when it was, the mid-90s, mid to late 90s, instead of just filming, what I saw and thinking that might be of interest to me in a few years' time, I tried to approach it more as a presentation and, worked a bit harder on my commentary, did some reading about the history of the place, and a little bit of entertainment thrown in, It was never just going to be a dry history presentation, There's got to be a bit of fun, a bit of interest. And also observations which are nothing to do with the railway, like nature and sort of wildlife that you come across if you're scooting through those sorts of places, of which there's been loads. Sorry, in answer to your original question, my ex-wife Sammy, if you're listening, all credit to you, gave me an idea to stick on a DVD on eBay, and it just sort of went from there, really. And I've tried to pop another one or two every year. I don't do a huge output like the YouTubers. I'm quite lazy. I have other things to do as well. And that's the way it goes, really. Yeah.
And once those started to sell, did that kind of fuel your passion for creating more films?
Yeah. The thing is, people often say, are you going to do all the disused railways? And I'd need another 5 lifetimes to cover that stuff. There's so much. There's absolutely miles and miles of it. All I've done, really, is the south. I've started in sort of Kent, Sussex, and sort of moved my way west and got as far as Devon. I haven't really done anywhere else in the country. So it's certainly not financially driven. It's purely driven by, it really doesn't make any money. It's more a question of which line I really want to see. So far, I've read about, I don't know, a fantastic viaduct near Lyme Regis, for example. And I thought, oh, wow, I've got to see that. I need to go and see that. And that's what drives it, really. So all the time that there's still lines that I really want to see, I'll keep doing it. And there are so many. I'm never going to be short of material.
And what kind of equipment do you need? What kind of camera do you have? How do you do the editing?
It's very old, very basic, laughable, really. I use high-8 tape, and I have a variety of... Good thing with a high-8 camera, it's very cheap. You can get them second-hand on eBay. If you fall off your bike or something like that and break one, you just pick up another one. I've always got half a dozen to hand. And the editing is insanely basic. I mean, I play down the wire from the camera into an old DVD recorder, the variety which you used to get in the early 2000s, which are very much like a VHS recorder, if you're old enough to remember that.
Oh, yeah.
Exactly the same principle. They didn't do them for that long, actually. But really, I mean, so the only editing suite I have is a pause button. That's it. It's nothing else. It's rough. It's quite sort of punk rock. But what I try and do is squeeze absolutely as much filmmaking capacity as I can out of that basic medium.
Hmm.
So people often say, "Oh, is it available on? Why can't I get it on Vimeo? Why can't I have it on a memory stick?" And I said, "If you want that, then go and buy somebody else's."
Well, I think that's really interesting because I think a lot of people might think that you need like high-tech stuff, like a GoPro and like video editing software. And I think that's really interesting that you use such kind of a low-tech approach because it's doable and clearly it's working and people are buying your films. I've bought your films and I was just looking at your list the other day and there's a couple more that I want to get. So it's, it works.
Yeah, it works. And I think there's room for everybody, that since I've been doing it, I've seen so many more people arrive on the scene, mostly YouTube. I don't see anyone else doing it on DVD, not surprisingly, really, because a lot of people do get in touch and say, "Well, I don't have a DVD player anymore." And so, well, you ain't going to see it then, are you? But
It's very niche.
There are many people that do disused railway films all over YouTube. And as you know, I collaborate with some of them. Always happy to, I think there's room for everybody. But for me, it's laziness partly, and I like that technology, so I'll keep going until they stop buying it altogether. I'll probably keep going a bit after that too, actually.
So what are your top 3 favorite destinations or rail lines or places to explore?
That's a really tough call, You fall in love with a little bit of every single one you do, really. But I've always had a particular fondness. Well, the Isle of Wight is fantastic.
Oh.
The Isle of Wight is a wonderful place. It feels like it's about 20 or 30 years behind the mainland in the sort of atmosphere. Things are not quite so stitched up. There's not so many private signs. People are friendlier. The shops are quite often closed on a Sunday. It's extraordinary. And there's a lot to see on the Isle of Wight. The countryside's beautiful. Loads of disused railways. Everybody I spoke to there who owned a station, I said, can I come and film? Sure, come in, have a cup of tea. So a big place in my heart, the Isle of Wight, always. That would probably be quite near the top of the list. The Meon Valley line, which goes from what are we talking? Hampshire, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
That's very beautiful. A lot of that's a trail, actually. You'd love it, actually, if you like the Downslip. You can cycle a lot of it. Lots of stations still there.
I love the South Downs, so I'm definitely going to have to check that out.
I think you'd like the Meon Valley. I mean, that's a really lovely trail. There was quite a bit of sneaking about and trespassing on that one. I was quite adventurous still at that point. But other than that, I think Devon's got, again, the whole countryside thing. There's plenty of trails down there for the cyclist. One of the best ones for me, which kind of brings me full circle, is this one from the top of Dartmoor, which runs right the way down into the valleys. And that was one I walked as a kid with my dad in 1978 or 9 or whenever it was. And it was great to go back there on my 40th birthday and cycle that 9 miles. And it's hard to beat, that one.
Sounds good. I've never spent much time in Dartmoor, so that's another place I definitely want to explore. So how do you find places to explore? Like what piques your interest? How do you do the research? How do you decide where to go?
Well, anybody who's into old railways like me will have a lot of books. You don't need the books now because you can get it all online. But I got a great book which shows you all the disused lines in map form in the whole of the UK. And so that gives you an idea of what's close to you. So, I mean, I've started locally, obviously, and gradually broadened out and went further and further afield. So there's just the practicality. How far do you want to travel? That's part of it. But really, it's just a question of a lot of the Facebook groups are good for this because there's my group, Disused Railways of Sussex, is only one of many. There's Disused Railways of Devon. Somebody running a group for every area, and you can sort of dip your toe in and see what they're looking at. And someone will put a picture up saying, "Wow, I explored this great viaduct today. Check it out. Here are my pictures." And you think, "Oh wow, I've really got to go and see that for myself." Yeah. So inspiration can come from anywhere, but more and more online than it used to, I suppose.
So how do you suggest that people who want to get into this find new places to explore? Should they just start kind of Googling their local area?
Yeah. Very much. I mean, wherever you live in this country, you're not going to be that far away from a disused railway line, and probably not that far away from one which is perfectly public, accessible, travelable, and get on down, have a look. I mean, disused railways of whatever your local county is, and there'll be loads to see, always.
And I also think that the canals are really fascinating. I know you've done that one canal tunnel video that I purchased. I find it so fascinating that there's so many, not just railways, but canals and just old transportation lines that have been abandoned and closed and are explorable.
That's the weird thing, is that, I mean, that the canals were taken over by the railways, you know. The railways are ruined to some extent by the roads. You think, I wonder if we're going to be, people in the future are going to be doing the disused M25 or something. Nice to think. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people say you're going to do the canal network, you know, and I'd love to, you know, but life is only so long. So I think there's plenty of other people doing the canals. But similarly, actually, I just got to tell you about the film that you bought, the Hardham Canal Tunnel. I did get in trouble for that one because I didn't ask any permission or anything. I just bowled in there and hoped for the best. Sold it to some guy, and he said, "Chris, really like the film, really, really good fun, entertaining." He said, "But please, don't go down there again, because I work for Southern Water. I'm responsible for that tunnel. It's very dangerous. And if a brick falls on your head, it's going to be a real problem.
Oops.
So keep out." Which was very sweet of him, I thought. Yeah, get the occasional rap on the knuckles.
But it's great because I would never go down there because I don't know how to get in. And I think it's changed a bit since you did the film, and it's a bit more difficult to get into it. But it's great because I can see inside this place that I'd been reading about and doing research on for my book, and obviously was never going to go down there on my own. So it was great to get access to this place that I was so fascinated by and got to see inside it.
There's a certain demographic that I sell to who, I'm not suggesting this is your bracket by any means, but there's plenty of folk who are quite a bit older than me. Some of them actually drove the trains on the lines that no longer exist. I got one in Australia, another one in South Africa, another guy in Portugal. They remember the lines when they were open, and they want to see them now, you know, closed and that many years later, or ex-railwaymen who are just too old, maybe too old to walk, and they just want to have one more look inside, you know, whichever tunnel it was. So that's a magical thing, because you end up having a sort of exchange with them, and they give you some of their memories, you know, which are worth more than anything you can ever buy in a book. It's just fantastic when you get to hear first-hand stuff.
Yeah, and the films really bring it alive, too. It's much more interesting than just seeing some still photographs, which are also interesting. But when you're walking through the tunnel or walking down the railway line, you cycle it. It's really, really just brings it alive.
I think a lot of people like a journey. Whereas the books, even with the best photographs, are great. And I mean, I have plenty of those books. But a lot of people enjoy actually, okay, so we're leaving the station here at Forest Rail or whatever, and now we're heading west, and we're going under this bridge. So those that either have never done it or have done it and want to see it again, the trip is quite different to stills, I think.
Absolutely. So what future projects do you have in mind?
Yeah, there's always a few. And there's stacks of stuff in Devon that I want to do, absolutely stacks. And if they keep opening railways down there, you know, the thing is to crack on and film them before they reopen anything else, because this will be regarded for something like that oak can. You know, that the years of closure, this peculiar bracket of time, which the young people of the future will wonder about. How come that line was closed for 50 years? You know, what did it look like when it wasn't working? So, yes, I haven't done very much in Kent, only a couple in Kent. So, that's about it. I'm getting pressure from people to do some stuff in Norfolk, because Norfolk's got lots of lovely ones. But I can only really realistically stick a week or maybe 2 weeks a year into this, you know. So it's always slow.
Yeah. So where can people find you online and learn more about what you do?
Well, I have a very clunky and rudimentary old website, which is www.dumpman.co.uk. Or if you want to watch something for free, then go on YouTube, put in a search for Dumpman Films, and you'll see one or two things there. Some of it's me, some of it's collaborations with this wonderful chap called the Bald Explorer.
Yep.
And also there's a couple called the Whitewicks. Paul Whitewick, he's very prolific on YouTube. They do, you know, railway films, absolutely all over the country. Do a little bit with them. Yeah, I mean, that'll probably find you most of what I get up to, I think.
And do you have any kind of final top tips for people who want to get involved in this themselves?
It's tricky. I mean, if it was a few years ago, I'd say buy this book, buy that book. You don't really need to do that. Actually, probably the best tip I can give you is, other than the Facebook groups where there's a disused railway group for every area of the country, There's a wonderful website that's been going for years, run by a man called Nick Catford, who's very well respected, disused railway guy. I think he was a motorbike career driver from the late 60s up until more recently. And everywhere he went, he took photos of disused railway stations. Has a huge catalogue, and the website that he runs is absolutely beyond, everybody uses it. I think it's disusedstations.org or something like that. If you put that in as a search, you'd see. It's astonishing. There's so much in the history, the detail, the photos. You can spend a lifetime just looking at that. Never step outside your front door.
Sounds like a plan.
It's really, really good.
Well, thank you so much for joining us and talking about your films and your disused railways that you like to explore. I think it's really important for me to give people more options of things to do outdoors, because one thing is just going on a walk, but another thing is going on a walk and exploring some history.
Going on a walk where you're going to find something good to look at. That's always good.
Yeah, it is. Great. Well, thank you.
Absolute pleasure. Nice to talk to you, Holly.
Nice to talk to you.
Hopefully talk to you again.
Thank you for listening. Please drop me a line and let me know what you thought about this week's episode. You can email me at holly@hollywharton.com or find me online and get in touch there. As I've mentioned before, I am finally accepting applications for podcast guests. If you are interested in being a guest, you can head over to hollywharton.com/pitch and fill out the form there. Also, if you know of anyone who would be perfect for the show, please feel free to send them the link or get in touch with me and send me their name or a link to one of their social media profiles or their website. Thank you so much. And remember to visit hollywharton.com/435 for the show notes on this episode. Happy trails to you. Thanks so much for listening to Into the Woods with Holly Wharton. You can find more information about today's episode, including links for topics that were discussed, at hollywharton.com. That's HOLLYWORTON.com. If you'd like to connect with other listeners and get support on your journey, I would love for you to join my private community on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Holly Wharton. That's patreon.com/Holly Wharton. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next week.